Thank you as well, Ma'am Bianca, for that very informative discussion. And now, for the third speaker, allow me to introduce him. He is no other than
Our next discussant is a passionate teacher from Bayside Integrated School. He is a 24-year-old guy, and now he will be discussing the evolution of Caesarean principles and their relevance to contemporary theories of language. Let's welcome our next speaker and discussant, Mr. Aaron James David.
Hello, this is Aaron James M. David. I am the reporter for the evolution of the Caesarean principle and their relevance to the contemporary theories of language. So before we start, or before we, shall we say, go to the evolution of the Caesarean principle, we must first understand the first theories of language in which the Caesarean developed upon. So the first one is the structure of scientific revolution. Now, this is a work done by Thomas S. Kuhn, and according to this, Kuhn's approach to history and philosophy of science focuses on the conceptual issues like the practice of normal science that influences historical events, emergence of scientific discoveries, nature of scientific revolutions, and the progress through scientific revolution. So what do we mean by this? According to Kuhn, science, or what he refers to as natural science, is different from societal science, or what we refer to now as social science. According to him, there are a lot of questions that needs to be answered, like what sort of intellectual options and strategies were available during the time of these people, or were available to people during this given amount of time. What type of lexicons, terminologies were known and employed during certain epochs or time itself, stressing the importance of not attributing traditional thoughts to early investigators, because in his idea, unlike natural science or normal science, societal science tends to slow down or have some peaks of changes as language is developed slowly or needs to be observed or be within the group itself. There needs to be a shift, or a revolution, a change. Now, Kuhn's book argues that the evolution of scientific theory does not merge from the straightforward accumulation of facts, but rather the changing of intellectual circumstances and possibilities, such as the approach that largely commensurate the general historical school of nonlinear history. Now, according to this, or according to his study, this is nonlinear, or doesn't follow a straightforward learning. It is done through large peaks or paradigms, changes of worldview that develops language, social science. So here is Thomas S. Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolution. Now, what are the changes that has been done after his work? Well, one of them is from Margaret Masterman. Who is Margaret Masterman? Later we'll discuss who is Margaret Masterman. But let's see what she has to say. Margaret Masterman has recently subjected Kuhn's book to close scrutiny, and according to her findings, the theory used terms in no less than 21 different senses or scenes. While we believe that Masterman's findings are somewhat exaggerated and are at times the result of overinterpretation of certain passages or even mere misunderstanding, the fact remains that Kuhn did not employ the term of paradigm consistently. As I mentioned before, he uses the word paradigm to explain the scientific revolution, but according to his book itself, there are some self-conflicting or contradictional meanings, or even completely different meanings that weren't really explained in his work. So who is Margaret Masterman to look at this, or to decide these changes, or in such a way look at the philosophical writing of Thomas S. Kuhn? Well, not a lot of people know Margaret Masterman, but they should. She was born in May 1910 by 4 and died in 1986, was a British linguistic philosopher well known for her pioneering work in the field of computational linguistics and especially in machine translation. She founded the Cambridge Language of Research Unit. So, what is computational linguistics? Now, this wasn't developed at the same time. She is merely a pioneer. Well, it is important to be a pioneer. You're the one to first do this. You started this, and that's a lot of things. But what is computational linguistics? It is a interdisciplinary field that is concerned with the computational modeling of natural language, or in this case, they try to emulate how language is done through computers, or they try to imitate the evolution of language through computational linguistics. Computational approach into linguistics in question in general computational linguistics drawn upon the linguistic or the language itself, computer science, artificial intelligence as they try to emulate how language is done, predictability of language, math, logic, philosophy, cognitive science, cognitive philosophy, and a whole slew of things. Just to say, it's very complex. You actually need a course to study this. But in short term, it was a big deal. It was really a really, really big deal that it has caused this. Kuhn, in his later works, or at least his later findings, 1972, at least 1981, later admitted that his stylistics inconsistency, or he kind of admitted that, yeah, I did something wrong. At least were in his earlier use of the paradigm, as it is viewed that Thomas Kuhn presented the theory as a whole, or it was already completed, but it was sort of developing during his time. But he does make two emphases of what a paradigm is. The first one is a paradigm of constellation of group of commitment. Now, what do we mean by this? Paradigm is something accepted within the group, constellational, or through constellation, which means they're interconnected. They're very much connected to one another. A commitment agreed upon. A paradigm that is shared examples of theories that rules in which each member is given discipline and has been initiated in the course of his apprenticeship, which means this is something learned. This is something agreed upon. There are rules, there are discipline that comes with it. Characterizing a given paradigm as a general epistemology viewpoint as a social phenomenon. It is viewed as a social change. It is something that is done through what we refer to as a shift of paradigm or a shift of knowledge. It replaces the old. Later we'll discuss what it is. The branch of philosophy that examines the nature of knowledge as it is, a presumption and foundation of its existence and validity, how valid a notion is or how valid an idea is, and later on it was developed as a social science or its own branch. This in general is agreed, or the general agreement with Kuhn and the intellectual paradigms of the given culture and its social groups as given periods in which it is shared and observed by individual members. Now, according to this, this is something agreed upon in this idea that language is something that is observed or absorbed within the group. And the revolutionary act of setting up the framework of development or new paradigm to replace the old one. So, in this idea, something would need to replace the old one. Simply, if another theory is developed from this, it will replace this. And the next one, and the next one. It's always something new. And which leads us to the Caesarean principle. Caesarean principle is developed by Ferdinand de Saussure, was a Swiss linguist who laid the foundation for the field of linguistics in the 20th century. This was the later development, or was the paradigm that shifted from scientific revolution to the Caesarean principle. Although I won't be able to explain the totality of the Caesarean principle, this was the paradigm shift. The Caesarean, as well documented in the subsequent discussion, did not immediately been put forward in a fully fledged theory. It was a developing theory. It was, or It wasn't able to solve something without changes or without modification or improvement to all problems in previous methods. As I mentioned before, this was a paradigm change. This was a change from scientific revolution to structural linguistics. It wasn't perfect when it first came out. And it was or has been capable of handling but invited later generation of scholars to engage in what he refers to as the mopping up operation of code, or the cleaning up of the mistakes when it comes to scientific revolution. Although we can only see Ferdinand Saussure, or some people may see Chomsky better than Saussure, because he sort of polished everything, then was only a linguist for the 20th century, and what we refer to as the father of modern day linguistics, or the father of the 21st century linguistics, is Noam Chomsky. It is still to be argued that Saussurian principle does prove something, which is it did make a paradigm shift from scientific revolution to the Saussurian principle to what we refer to now as the contemporary theories of languages, the later languages that has been developed from the Saussurian principle. And that's all. Thank you.